Hi guys, and welcome to this digital painting tutorial in Procreate where we are painting landscape elements, and today's focus will be a tree. And this is what I have by the end of this tutorial. On a layer separate from the background, I put in a medium gray to fill that layer, and then I add another layer on top of that. Next, I select a dark blue, almost black, and then I use the airbrush, the medium hard, and I size it to about the size of the trunk. Next, I go into the adjustments and I go down to liquefy, and I use push to sort of create this wavy, jagged edge. And that's because I want the bark to sort of have a little bit of shape already established before I start painting on it. Remember that the branches start out thick at like the base, and then as they go up towards the sky, they typically get thinner as you are making them. And again, I go back to liquefy because I like the way that it sort of creates a more organic look to those smaller branches, excuse me. Once I have completed getting the tree the way that I want, the silhouette, I duplicate it. Better to be safe than sorry. Next, I'm going to grab a very dark olive green and then grab some of that leatherwood brush. Make sure the opacity on it is down, and we don't want it too large of a size. And to me, at least, I love this brush because I think it has a very nice texture that looks a lot like bark. Very rough bark, but bark nonetheless. Once I got some of this color down, I ended up deciding that I wanted to put the tree in alpha lock. So I go to that layer, I click on it, and then I selected alpha lock. And that's so that I could paint on it without worrying about going outside of the initial shape of the tree itself. Now I will continue to build up the colors slowly but surely with lighter olive tones of green. And I'm just placing them down, like the color down, where I believe moss would grow on the tree, depending on where the light source is as well. And in order to make the moss sort of blend in better, I use the smudge tool, and the smudge tool brush that is selected is also leatherwood. Using leatherwood as the smudge tool helps maintain the integrity of the bark that's already painted, because it keeps in line with the already established brush strokes that we put down in leatherwood as well. Right now, I'm adding a lighter brown to the back side of the tree as like a backlight so that the tree doesn't feel flat, right? It's a cylinder. It's not a flat shape. So we want to make sure that we have light sources coming from the back side and the front side of the tree so we really get that 3D effect. Next, I'm going in with the medium hard brush. I'm going to take down the opacity quite a bit and keep the size really small. And I'm using a very bright yellowish green, more yellow than green, and just tapping in some of the details where I want the moss and the moss specifically on like individual pieces of bark to stand out. Silence. Well, if you're still here, thank you. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Don't forget to like, comment, engage. Once I have established, the parts that I wanted highlighted, I do go in one more time with yellow, not just yellowish green, but yellow, and really make sure that those colors pop and come through so that there's like a very obvious focal point that the eye should be driven to about this tree. The next minute is basically me just repeating the same stuff where, I'm just touching up areas I'm not a fan of. But one thing I did want to point out is I really am not a fan of the tree shape that I started with. But I was in a hurry, so I just decided to keep going with it. But definitely make sure that you like your tree shape before you start painting on it and proceeding forward with this project. So I grabbed the Aurora brush, and this is what I want it to look like at the end, but basically I reset the brush so you can see what it initially looks like, and basically I just make the spacing even more, and I increase the jitter. Um, on the this this brush has like a color variation to it, so I didn't want to get rid of all of the color variation. I just took it down a little bit. I like that it has a little bit, but it can be pretty extreme depending on what you're working on. So just make sure it's at the right level for you. Yes, it might require some playing around to figure out like what settings you like. So I went in and I'm using the smudge tool right here to just sort of take out, some of the super established leaves at the bottom and just kind of get like a softness about it. And then I just went in and tapped in just a couple of small leaves. I did that on the other side as well that you're seeing now. And then so that it blends in nicely, I use the smudge tool and it's on the leatherwood. Leatherwood's kind of my go-to for blending nature when I'm trying to do things like moss, trees, grass. Not always, but it is a good go-to. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to go down to cotton. Cotton is a really good like background, like soft sort of tree like leaves in the background. So I put that down and then I used Gaussian blur to blur it out. I'm using just a slightly darker color and now I'm painting in with the rainforest brush. Now, I did change up the rainforest brush, not by much. I just ended up similar to the Aurora brush, just spacing out the how close together the brush was, and then also the jitter. And I'm just layering up on a new layer each time, and using the Gaussian blur for each layer. So that way the tree the tree leaves are not too focused because they are sort of further away, right? The thing that is in focus is the bark on the tree, and so we don't want the tree leaves to distract. So I'm just making sure that if we do have some that stand out, that they are far and few between. Plus, they make a great statement when they're not all competing together at the same time, right? Again, I'm just slowly building in some leaves, and I went from lightest to the dark towards the top because I'm thinking of the sun coming down and hitting the leaves, right? So the leaves immediately at the top above us would be the darkest because they are the most hidden underneath all the other layers of leaves. And then the ones on the edge, the ones that we're seeing that have the brightness, those would be the ones that we would see furthest out that are the most touched by the light. I went in and I added just a little bit of highlight on the tree on the underside just so it didn't blend in 100% with the dark like leaves above it. I felt like it was kind of getting lost. So I wanted to make sure that it stood out just a bit. So technically you could stop here, right? That's your tree. You completed a tree. I wanted to show you, what else you could do with trees since that is the focus of this landscape element today. But that tree is dead center, the focus. Now, is this piece the best composition piece? No, it's really not. But because the focus was the tree and that's what the tutorial element was about, I put it front and center. But I'm just working with it since that's where I painted it and just working around it for this piece. So you could see how in a full landscape painting, how it could look if you were to fully render it with other trees around it. The trees in the background that I used, those are just dark, like almost black. And then I used Gaussian blur to to make sure they really fell into the background because I didn't want them to, again, compete with the first tree and have to render all of them and then sort of have the focus get lost. Next, again, you can always pause and look at my layers. I'm just trying to get an idea of, where the light is coming from, how dark the background's going to be. Trust the process. I know it doesn't look great right now. Even I was hating it, wondering, is this actually going to come together? I feel like almost all of us have that experience at some point during our piece, though, right? It's not just me. Maybe it is. Hopefully not. I find a blending mode that I think works well. It took me a minute, that's all. There, no. There it is. Pick it. All right. So I brought it forward because I just didn't feel like it was standing out enough, and I wanted it to sort of hide some of the trees that I felt like were competing again with that first front tree. So I ended up then also painting this, making sure that it was on the same blending mode as the other layer, and then also blurring it. And so I'm sure you can see it's starting to come together a little bit more. I choose the back side of this tree and I feather around it, and then I do the Gaussian blur on the back side. Very, very little, just enough to make it so that the front, and I do it again here at the bottom, I forgot. Just so that way it really puts into focus the bark at the middle of the tree. So yeah, you don't have to do that, but I just thought it helped, especially because there's so much blurred imagery behind on the back side of that tree where I'm currently drawing. The composition was not my favorite just because I definitely would have chosen different composition. But because I was focused on the tree for this tutorial, I didn't move it since I painted it exactly as it is right there. So working around this was definitely a bit of a challenge for my brain. I think I pulled it off by the end, but it is not the most aesthetically pleasing piece I've ever made. And I just felt like these were too big. And again, competing. Their sizes were just too competitive with the main tree and started to take away from the uniqueness of how close it was and the texture and the detail on it. So I shrunk those and just painted them in a little bit more, making sure that they were different colors, not as saturated and dark. And you'll see me continue to sort of mess with them a little bit. I do blur them a bit just so that way it gives us the illusion of them being pushed back just slightly. Not as much as the ones in the back, but just enough to let us know it's not standing with the one in the front. So I select and I resize and sort of move around that tree. I just wasn't liking the way that it was going. Now, on a separate layer, I am adding in these little tiny details, just tapping them in, just to give it a little bit of depth and dimension so it's not just a flat tree hanging out on the side of this painting. And then I start to paint in some more bark texture with that leather wood brush, just so that way we're also establishing a shadowed side where there's less light hitting the tree, and then we have the lighter side. It's always interesting watching back videos when I'm like editing them and realizing where I could have done things a little differently, but you don't see it at the time because you're too close to the project. All right, and now that I have that, I'm going to do just a tiny little bit of blur, just so that way the details are still there, but they're not, front and center. And I made an accidental sharp edge here, so I just went in with the leather wood and blended it, so it wasn't a big deal. I go back to that tree because it's making me upset. And there we go. I make it darker. and I take out some of that saturation. And then I also am out of that tree and I take down the saturation, or not the saturation. I turn up the saturation, but make it a bit on the, darker side. I don't want it too bright. So, on a new layer, I brush on top of this tree with the color that was already bleeding in from the side, so the tree starts to not just not stand out too much, and also indicates to us how much light is fighting to get through the leaves to this tree. I also ended up coloring in a few other bright greens into the background just to sort of help push this light that's really trying to come through through these leaves. Almost done, guys. Almost there. So the shadows that I just made, I end up using the Aurora as the smudge tool just to sort of help get some leaf shapes in there to disrupt the harshness of the shadow, but still keep it there. And then I just slightly use that Gaussian blur again. And so it looks like there might be a bush right there on that corner on the right. And then I'm just going in and adding just a few more leaves. And I do need to change the blending mode so they show up a little bit. And then just blend them, or not blend them, sorry, blur them a bit. I wasn't pleased yet with this, so I end up making the bottom of the tree just a bit darker. And at this point, I felt like it was a good time to stop. And this is the final piece. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.